I'm Chris Berman. If you're under, say, 35 years of age, you're saying, what do you mean we don't get 300 stations? Well, in the 70s, ancient history, what was cable TV? One man, visionary, 24 hours of sports on TV. He was told it'll never work. Just like a few years before that, man will never walk on the moon. Wrong and wrong. Bill Rasmussen was right. ESPN is an idea that'll work. Boy, has it ever. 30 plus years later, we're everywhere. But how did we really begin? Only Bill Rasmussen can take you back to the beginning of the greatest success story in the history of sports television. His ideas, yes, his enthusiasm, his fierce determination and belief in success changed the way we all watch television and the way we watch sports today. And I ought to know he did it with a smile, every bit of it. Ladies and gentlemen, our George Washington, Bill Rasmussen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I always have to do this, and we have to change the lights a little bit. I'm really, really curious. I have to know, and I have to see a show of hands. Can we bring the lights up a little so I can see a show of hands? How many of you have heard of ESPN? Oh, we didn't even need the lights to come. Well, maybe leave them up a second. How many have not heard of ESPN? I know you're too embarrassed to put your hand up, so I know he's kidding back there. It's really an interesting thing that has happened with ESPN over the years. When I first started doing this many years ago, I would say, how many people have heard of ESPN? And I was at a commencement at Rutgers, and there were probably a third of the people said, I think maybe I have. But anyway, the other part of the question I want to ask, how many of you, if any, remember the first night that ESPN went on the air on September 7th, 1979? Is there anybody in the audience that goes back that far? Good, I can say anything I want about that night, can't I? You'll never know the difference. Anyway, I am really delighted to be here with you today, and we want to talk about adversity. I don't want to fall off the front of the stage, so we won't have that adversity problem. But if they don't start the clock, we're going till 5. Not just kidding. Adversity comes in a lot of forms, and you're all familiar, obviously. There are some great examples in history. A couple of them, Walt Disney was told he had no imagination and no good ideas, and after several business failures and bankruptcies, he kind of found a pretty good recipe. It pretty well worked. Thomas Edison's teachers told him he was really stupid. And he went to work, and his first 2 bosses fired him, and he said, I think I'm going to work on this little invention thing. And he tried, and after missing 1,000 times and more, he came up with that incandescent light bulb that works pretty well. Henry Ford had 5 businesses fail before he founded the Ford Motor Company. And one of my favorites, because of my age, is Colonel Sanders. 65 years old, good old Colonel Sanders. He had this really neat special chicken recipe that he wanted to sell to restaurants. Anybody know how many restaurants he visited before they finally took it? 1,009 stops before number 1,010 said, I'll try it. That's a lot of restaurants to visit. My favorite, though, of all, and I suspect many of you have heard of the Cat in the Hat, Theodore Geisel, a.k.a. Dr. Seuss. Everybody has either read, heard, or maybe people read to you The Cat in the Hat. He was around for a long time. Unbelievably, even though he sold millions of books, the first 27 publishers he went to, 27, rejected his first book to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street. Can you imagine that? Mulberry Street. Everybody knows where Mulberry Street is, right? Springfield, Massachusetts. And just in case you're ever in the area, this is just a little aside, and I'm not paid by the Geisel Museum or anything. It is an amazing experience. It's a couple of blocks away from the City Hall in Springfield, Massachusetts. You can take your children or grandchildren into the courtyard and meet the Cat in the Hat and all the other characters and go through the museum, and it's an amazing, amazing experience. But you're not here to hear about all of those kinds of things. Those are people who did some pretty amazing things. We're going to talk about Walt Disney a little bit later as well. I had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of adversity along the way, you might say, and we'll get to that. But when you have some adversity What should you really look for? How do you get past it? And what about your company and the company's adversity? We learned early on in the ESPN process what exactly is it you want to do. I think too many companies get involved, write the mission statement, decide when we're going to have a meeting, when we're going to talk about this, and so on. In 1978, October of 1978, we went to the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA in Kansas City, and said, we have this idea. We're going to show more television, more events of your student athletes and your teams and schools and so on than have ever been shown anywhere in history. And they said, how are you going to do that? Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do all these sports. We're going to get some details about that in a minute. That was what we told them in 1978. That one sentence, that's all it was. We weren't going to do any news. We weren't going to do any weather. We weren't going to do anything else. That one sentence has now been distilled, and ESPN's mission statement may be one of the shortest you have ever seen. It's exactly 6 words long. To serve sports fans anytime, anywhere. Do you ever see news from Afghanistan, from the Middle East, from hurricanes or anything on ESPN? Nope. Every single decision at ESPN is driven by those words. And if you think about it, and you think about your business and what it is you're trying to accomplish, if you define your mission very, very strictly and succinctly, you can't help but stay on the right path. Now, I've seen mission statements 3 paragraphs long, 3 pages long. If it takes 3 pages to explain it, that's too complicated, I think. That's just my own idea. But nevertheless, looking at this, by the way, this is the new 197,000 square foot digital center. And that sign that you're looking at can be seen from about a mile away as you drive through Bristol, Connecticut. And in that building where they do the NFL is a half a football field inside the building. When you see Chris Berman and his buddies on Sunday morning doing all of their NFL analysis, and they pop up from here and there and everywhere, it's amazing. They have 6 studios in that building. They have 92 terabytes of distribution capability. I don't even know what a terabyte is, much less 92, but I know it goes a long way. I had well, we're going to get to that about satellites. While I'm thinking about it, though, I had trouble. I couldn't even spell it. Does it have 1 T or 2 and 2 L's, or the other way around, 1 L and 2 T's? Just one of those things. But anyway, it gives you an idea about the size of that. No wonder you can see it from a mile away. So ESPN has, back then, and through its entire 35-plus year life, has talked about these kinds of things as focus, 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 and don't tell me we're doing something else. We're doing nothing but sports. It wasn't always that easy, but we're getting them all done. I'm glad that all of you put your hands up early on, because none of you are in the 2% category. Can you believe that? We started when there was a cable universe of about 12.5 million people, 12.5 million households. 12.5 million households, can you imagine that? Today, they've gone beyond 100 million, and they're now going backwards, and they're back under 100 million, because they now have 10 or 12 other means of distributing sports across the nation. But 98% of all Americans in the brand, and it's one of the 4 top brands recognition in the world, which is something of which everyone's pretty proud. Now this one, I'm going to ask, and I'm going to challenge the audience. Average person spends 6 hours and 57 minutes with ESPN media each week. It's 168 hours in a week. I've had people say 6 hours and 57 minutes in a week. I spend that much in a day. You watch on Sunday afternoon or Monday Night Football or whatever, Sunday morning NFL Today, you probably watch a little bit more than that. Anybody in here, really sports fans, limit yourself to just 6 hours a week? Probably not. When you start to see all of the other things that they can do that have happened, I know that a lot of you are watching more than 6 hours and 57 minutes. And this goes back a little bit, But that's quite a record, 326.4 million digital video clips. Sounds like a lot. Sounds to me like a lot. I don't know. We used to worry about satellite, now we have to worry about digital. This will mean something to some of you. When the recent college football championship was played, they did what they call their megacast. They took 12 methods of distribution available to them, and we're streaming over 100 million minutes of the championship games with Ohio State and that other team they played. Now I'm hearing about the fans. I've got them. That team was from Florida, wasn't it? Do we have any FSU fans around? Any Oregon fans around? Should I ask about Kentucky recently in the NCAA? Florida State. Okay, Florida State, that's good. Anyway, I want to get to what every company has to have, a business plan. We think we had to have a business plan. Before we go into it, I want to tell you about my idea of a business plan after I had gotten fired. I mentioned earlier I was going to tell you a little bit about my own little section of adversity. I was a sports announcer for a number of years. I've done thousands of live sportscasts, did a lot of play-by-play, hockey, baseball, football, and so on, basketball, and was working for a hockey team in Hartford called the New England Whalers. Today they're the Carolina Panthers, I think. No, not Panthers, Carolina Hurricane. And in 1977-78 season, they had a bad one. They missed the playoffs for the first time in the league's short history. And as all good sports teams do when they miss the playoffs, what happens? They fire everybody except the players who skated on the ice and didn't make the playoffs. They went through the front office, and the PR director was gone. I was gone. I was the communications director. Ticket manager, I mean, they just cleaned house. But the way they did it was kind of unique. And those of you who are involved in today's world in human relations and how we take care of things, I was getting ready to play golf on Memorial Day weekend, 1978. Just before I went out the door, the phone rang. The lady's voice was on the phone. It was Colleen Howe. Any hockey fans recognize the Howe name? Gordy's wife was in charge of the world. And she was Gordy's agent and her boy's agent and everything else. And she worked with Howard Baldwin, managing partner of the Whalers. Howard had decided that all of us were being fired. And she called to give me the news. I'm going out the door, pick up the phone, hello, and it's Colleen. And she was a little nervous with the process. This isn't come in and we want to talk to you and we want to take care of things the proper way. This is, you're gone, baby. That's the way you're out of here. So she said, Bill, I didn't want to do it this way, but Howard doesn't want you back anymore, and neither do we. Goodbye. Does that constitute an exit interview or notice, or what is that? So I thought, well, I'm going to find out a little bit more about this. She also told me to go see Howard and pick up my check. So I went on Monday, Tuesday, first day after the holiday, went in to see Howard, and he said, what are you doing here? I said, well, Colleen said to come in and talk about separation and a check. He said, well, if you don't like the way it's going, you don't get the check. You want it or not? Get out of here and I'll mail you a check. Don't think that quite fit the norm either, but that's the way it was, and we were gone. As it happens, I was scheduled that very week after Memorial Day to appear with a local TV producer, putting together hour-long shows to, quote, bicycle. That was the phrase of the day. Bicycle, literally put your tape in the car and take it from one cable system to another cable system, and it would be a show that would show through the course of a month at the cable stations, the cable franchises in Connecticut. Now, do all of you know how big Connecticut is? This monitor down here in front of me is about the same size. It's not very big. There were only 10 franchises in the entire state of Connecticut. 5 of them were inactive, and the biggest one had 9,500 subscribers. That was our whole universe. So he wanted me to talk to him about the Whalers season just passed and the Whalers season upcoming, and I called him and I said, Ed, I don't think this is going to work out because I'm not employed anymore. So see you later. He said, no, don't hang up, don't hang up. You got to come down and talk to me. I said, why do I have to come and talk to you? He said, I don't have anybody else to talk to. Wow, I was really in demand, wasn't I? So I went down to talk to him. We started, just what are we going to do? We can't do this. He told me he'd already done a hot air ballooning show. That was exciting. He had already done the Bristol Red Sox, a Class Z or whatever they were, Red Sox farm team. And so we started talking about basketball. The University of Connecticut has always had a good basketball team. Back in the 1960s, I had been a Massachusetts broadcaster, and we had done some UConn basketball games. So we said, well, maybe we can do something in Connecticut with basketball, anchored around the University of Connecticut, and see what we can do. So we began talking to Wesleyan and Yale and different schools. But our champion turned out to be the athletic director at the University of Connecticut, John Toner. We went out and said, would we like to do this in Connecticut, within the state of Connecticut, and we'd like you to be the lead school and so on. This is hard for lots of folks to understand. There was no Big East back then, which has since disintegrated, but it was pretty powerful for a number of years. And so he said he would work with us, and he would help us by giving us a couple of games to produce on a demonstration basis so that we could show the cable industry what our capabilities were and so on. And mind you, all of this is happening well within 45 days of having been fired. By the way, can you say that these days? Can you walk up to an employee and say you're fired? Or do you have to go through I guess you have to go, we've changed direction and this sort of stuff, I don't know. But I don't say anything about firing anybody anymore. It's just one of those things. It's what? I see, okay. But anyway, John Toner was very, very helpful, and so we began to think about things, and we said, well, we better put together some ideas. We didn't think of the words business plan, but we realized what we had to do, and what we did is we reduced it to something this simple: facts. We needed some financing, we needed some advertising, we certainly needed some content, we needed some technology, and the last S is really for subscribers in the cable system. That's what they are. Those are our customers. And I've thought about that over the years, and that's not a bad list for anybody. The advertising might be you advertising instead of us, where we wanted to sell advertising. The content was the NCAA, of course. Technology was the satellite. That was wonderful. Subscribers, just great. Customers all over the country, all 12.5 million households. Didn't occur to us that there were over 100 million households, or maybe at that time there were only 90 million households with TV. But we thought some portion of the 12.5 would be pretty good. Back in the 1970s, cable television had just become unregulated. And by the way, a monthly subscription to cable TV back then ranged from $5 to $7 a month. Want to pay that? Anybody pay that little today? I didn't think so. Anyway, we put all of those together and we started talking about financing. Well, what are we going to do with financing? We got to find some money. Where are we going to find some money? How about some bank financing? Do you think a bank would talk to us? No. I was talking to a group of bankers a couple of years ago, and I said, but we did use bank financing really in the end. They said, how'd you arrange that? I said, easy. It was a credit card advance. Bank issued the credit card, so I suppose that's bank financing. So we took a $9,000 credit card cash advance, began talking to anybody that would listen to us about this crazy idea of maybe we can do sports 24 hours a day. And then we said, 9,000 is going far. Talked to my parents and my brother and my sister, and we did a little friends and family financing. That got us up to $30,000. None of my friends and family had very much money, obviously. So then we finally found, through one of the really most unusual circumstances, and when you start down the hill of starting something new, and we'll talk about it in a minute, always ask questions. Always, always ask questions. Well, who can help? Who can we find? Who can help us this along the way? I happen to live in a condominium, and the association or the developer was going broke. Sold it to Fidelity Insurance Company in Philadelphia. They came up to look at the property and tried to figure out ways to create an awareness. And they said, let's see, this new hockey team in town is doing really well. They didn't know they just missed the playoffs. They thought they were still doing well. I was living there, and they said, can you get any hockey players to come out, and we'll put together a golf tournament, we'll invite people, and we'll show this whole thing off. And so we did that, and it worked out fine. And I thought about it, I was sitting there one day, and I said, you know, they helped me. I mean, I helped them. Maybe they can help me and point me toward a direction where I can find somebody that would help us finance this amazing idea that we have. We thought it was amazing. Everybody else thought it was crazy at that time. A very common, very, very common word was, you're going to do what? That's a 24-hour sport. You're going to do, nobody's going to believe it. You can't do that, can't do that. Anyway, I decided to call him just out of the blue sky, and turned out it was about 9:45 one night, and a gentleman that had talked to me about this golf tournament called back and said, hi, Bill, it's been a long time, and so on. What's up? So I started talking. I talked for about 15 minutes. He never said a word. Never said a word. I thought, that's interesting. Finally, I stopped talking, and he said, can you call the office tomorrow morning? I want you to talk to a gentleman by the name of J.B. Doherty. I said, sure. I didn't have any idea. Call the next morning. Gentleman, he's an ex-Marine, not the most dour ex-Marine captain you have ever seen. He said, J.B. Doherty. I said, hi, J.B. Bill, I know who it is. What's the story? Wow, that was a good way to start, wasn't it? So I tell him the same story. 15 more minutes, not an interruption or anything. Silence on the line. He's just, I have no idea if he's still on the line. I'm looking at the phone. Next thing he says, can you come down here tomorrow morning? Sure, I think the flight from Hartford to Philadelphia in those days was $13, a little different than the airfares today. Anyway, we went down the next morning. Long story short, they were a tiny, tiny little, they had spun off from the Fidelity insurance company that owned the condominium, and they had a little boutique investment firm who kind of liked the idea somewhat, maybe to invest $100,000 with us. Well, at the end of the day, they ended up investing about $275,000, ended up with a fraction of 1% of ESPN, which they own to this very day. So it turned out that that was a pretty good investment. But we traveled back and forth, and they said they would help us find some investment money, which we did. We traveled back and forth across the country, and what a lot of people don't realize is ESPN went all the way to we finally got financing from Getty Oil. Getty Oil was the 8th company we approached. I thought when we went to visit Taft Broadcasting, which was a big broadcasting giant of the day, that they would have this foresight to see what a wonderful opportunity they had. They were extremely courteous. We had a delightful lunch. The chairman of the board walked me out of the building toward the parking lot, kind of figuratively patted me on the head and said, you're a nice young man, but unfortunately, this idea will not work, and furthermore, in 3 years, there'll be no cable television. Within 8 years, there was no Taft Broadcasting. So, go figure, as they say. So, continuing the adversity path on the financing side, I was visiting Annapolis. The chairman of the TV committee was the athletic director at Annapolis. He had invited me to come down and see him one Friday afternoon, miserable day in December, early December, like the 5th. It was the 5th of December, Friday. And he said, you know, Bill, I think you ought to come to Kansas City and meet some of the boys. He was a real Southern naval captain. Some of the boys, you won't recognize the names because they were all the big heroes of the day, Darrell Royal and Sid Dempsey and some of those folks, and talk about this idea. Well, we didn't have enough money for another airline ticket. We didn't have enough money to pay our friends back in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, J.B. Doherty and his friends. But we were persistent. So I called J.B. and I said, well, they're still pretty enthusiastic. They'd like to have us come to Kansas City. He said, well, I just got a call from the West Coast. How would you like to make a trip, a presentation in Los Angeles Monday morning? Now, this is Friday night. I'm going to be in Los Angeles Monday morning, means I fly out on Sunday. I said, sure. Now, I'm excited about this. I'm exhausted, but I'm excited. Off we go, fly across to LAX. Some of you are familiar with that Marriott, I think it's still a Marriott, right across the street from LAX. I figured I'd stay there, drive out to Wilshire Boulevard the next morning. At about 2 in the morning, the hotel caught fire. Can you imagine that? I'm thinking the biggest presentation, maybe the last chance I have, and I'm standing in a parking lot for 3.5 hours, from 2 or 2:30 in the morning till 5 something. They let us back in the hotel just before 6 o'clock, in time to have breakfast and go make this presentation. I go to Getty Oil. I mean, I'm thinking, the world's against me. I'm having adverse reactions everywhere. This is, no matter what. A hotel, what are the odds? How many times do you think that hotel next to the airport's caught fire from then till now? Probably none, I hope. Anyway, I went in to meet the Getty vice president, who was in charge of all non-oil products. They own palm oil, and they own coconuts, and they own everything around the country. Even owned a dude ranch. And he was an operator. Loved to see me. He brought in a producer of a 1949 Emmy-winning movie to evaluate the idea that I was going to put. 1949, this is now 1978. The movie, I can't remember his name, but he offered not much in that meeting. But what I didn't know, and I never found out until much, 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 much later, the vice president that I was making the presentation to saw the word television. He lived in Hollywood, and he thought this was it. We're going to be in the TV business. His finance, that meeting was on the 18th floor. His finance manager's office was down on the 9th floor. And he told me many years later, before your elevator got from 18 to the street, Stu had called me and said, George, we're going in the television business. Now that was December 8th, and we had to go through a process. And he said, we have to evaluate it, and we have to get the strategic committee to agree, and we have to get this, and we have to, well, that's fine. How long is that going to take? About a week and a half or 10 days? And, no, it's a much longer process. Okay. So I left feeling pretty good. At least we were still kind of in the game. And that lasted through December, back and forth. And as we ended up, in the middle of February, on St. Valentine's Day, I was in Kansas City. We were getting ready to sign a contract with the NCAA, and I got a phone call. And Mr. Byers, Walter Byers, the executive director, secretary, came in and said, Mr. Rasmussen has a phone call. And Walter said, fine, I took it. And I got on the phone, and it was Getty saying, we're going to finance your business. They're going to give us $20 million. Now, this is February 14th, and we started just 6, 7, 8 months before, which was a pretty big move from our point of view. So see how easy it was to take care of the financing? Now the advertising was a little bit different. That was kind of fun. Who's the biggest sports advertiser in the world? Everybody probably knows it's Budweiser, right? So Budweiser was represented by Darcy McManus in New York. We went to Budweiser, just called him and said, we want to come down and talk to him. By the luck of the draw, we ended up with a vice president. And he said, sure, come on down. We drove down from Getty, walked in his office. And in our infinite wisdom, we had decided that for $2,760,000 times 8 sponsors, we could put the network on the air. Remember, we didn't have Getty's money. We were still working on our original couple of $100,000. But we went and made the presentation. He looked at us like we had just arrived from Mars. And maybe we did look like that. He said, let me take that to the brewery and I'll get back to you. Well, in a day or two, he called and he said, can you come down? We went back down and he said, we'll give you $500,000. Whoa! All of the money we had collected to that point didn't reach half of $500,000. And we looked him in the eye and said, well, that's not going to work. We were really getting pretty brazen at that point. But you have to really believe what you're doing, right? So we talked to him, and he said, well, let me get back to him, and we'll come down again another day. And a couple of days later, we went back down. That $500,000 offer, by the way, the window just over his shoulder, you know how in New York City they have all the advertising on all the walls of apartment buildings and business buildings and everything else? There was a big Miller sign right outside of his window. And so when he said $500,000 and we were saying no, And my partner was sitting to my left, and I'm looking right across from him, and the window was kind of up there. And I said, no, we think we've got some other options. And all I did was glance. And he knew full well what I was looking at, and he knew full well what. And he said, can you come back? Let me get back to the brewery. We went back, and later that week, we had a contract for $1,380,000, the largest contract in cable television history to that point. And that happened within 6 months of having been fired, all because we kept asking questions. And I've been doing that ever since, because that worked out pretty well. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Red goes backwards. Okay. The NCAA, I told you a little bit about that already, and who we were talking to and how it worked and how we got it all together. And Walter Byers, a crusty old guy who had been the executive director of the NCAA since 1951, when he was like 22 years old. And he had a Marine brush cut, and if you worked in his office and you met with someone, you put your suit and tie on and your shirt, and everything was buttoned down. It was like a Marine Corps drill camp. It was like living at Parris Island and doing commercial business. But anyway, we went back and forth and back and forth. He never came to any of the meetings. We went to the TV committee meetings. He never came. Finally, on January 25th, 1979, a day that is really significant to me, we were in a room smaller than this, but in a hotel meeting room. And he walked in through the back door and sat down at the table back there. Just burst in and sat, didn't say anything, didn't say, excuse me, pardon the interruption or anything, just, he's the boss. I mean, he owned the world of college sports. And I'm talking away, doing my presentation. In the middle of a sentence, he just stood up and he said, how do I know you're not just trying to get our name and using it as a fishing expedition to go out and do something? And I looked at him and I can't believe I did this. Even to this day, I can't believe I did this. And I pointed at him and I said, you name your bank, and whatever amount we agree to, we'll put 50% of it in your bank on July 1st. Never said another word, sat down. I kept on talking, and I thought, oh boy, I really did it this time, didn't I? Then he walks out. That was it. A couple more comments. Chairman Bowe said, well, Bill, thank you and the boys for coming. J.B. Doherty was there. A representative from Getty was there. Thanks for coming. Talk to you soon. I thought, okay. I turn and I look at my two cohorts. I don't have a white shirt on today, but if you have a white shirt on, that's the shade of their faces. And JB said, we don't have any money. How can you say that? I said, it's January. We'll have it by July. I mean, if you don't have belief in the system, you're not going to make it. So as we were wrapping up and picking things up, Walter's assistant, Tom Hansen, came through the side door and said, Walter wants to know if you can stay over till tomorrow and come out to the office. First time we've been invited out to his office, we went out. He was very gracious. Now tell me a little bit more about this. And we started talking. We told him about just recently completed March Madness. Back then there were only 32 teams in the postseason. And we said we were going to do everything. We were going to do every game that the networks didn't know. We were going to do football, basketball, baseball, whatever it might be. All the championships, lacrosse, soccer, skiing, golf. He said, let's get back to basketball. He said, he had an interesting arrangement in his conference room. It was a T, and he sat at the top of the T, and everybody warned you, whenever you went to see Walter Byers, don't ever let him put you in the seat to his right next to where the T comes together. We walk in the room, and he said, sit here. I said, okay. So I sat there. I'd been warned, but I'm there. And you mean you're going to do this? Yes. You're going to do that? Yes. You mean you're going to do yes. And he's saying, and I'm sure he's saying, this can't be right. Then finally he said, do you mean, and this way, do you mean to tell me if Lamar Tech and Weber State meet in the NCAA tournament, you'll televise that game? Yes, sir. Sure will. Okay. And off we went. Little aside, the following year's NCAA tournament, Lamar Tech and Weber State played. Do you think it was a coincidence? Do you think maybe Walter pulled a few strings? But anyway, I'm just kind of saying, I don't know. But I don't mean to say that Kentucky and well, no, let's not get into this year. But anyway, that was, we went through a period from January 25th, we stayed a day. We went back and forth a couple of times. We went back to Kansas City on the way to the Texas Cable Show to announce our idea to the cable world on February 8th, and we stopped at Kansas City. And it was one of the most humorous conversations I ever had with this Marine iconic executive director. I said, Walter, we're almost there. Could you give us a press release that maybe tomorrow we could kind of tell people that we're interested, that you're interested and we're about to reach a deal? He said, sure can. Write me a check for $100,000. Can't do that. Why not? I said, you know as well as I do. He said, I know you don't have the money. Well, maybe you can write me a check for $25,000. Sure, still don't have the money. So he said, this was a couple of days before we went, he said, stop by on the 7th on your way to Texas. I mean, we were flying Los Angeles, Hartford, Kansas City, Texas, everywhere. It was like stop by on the way over to the clubhouse. So we stopped by, and he said, well, I put together a little something for you, and we took it to Texas the next day. We announced it that day. We had 5 minutes to announce our program in a new programming venue. We announced it, and I will never, ever forget, as I walked off the stage and went down the aisle over there, a young man, well, not so young, but I mean, a gentleman in the cable industry, came up to me and he said, I don't know how you're going to do it. He said, but I'll tell you, he was from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, if you do half of what you just told us you were going to do, this is going to be the most successful network in cable television history. How about that? I wish I did know his name. He'd be an interesting guy to talk to today. Anyway, one of the things that we needed, technology. Well, there you go. I guess I'm going the wrong way. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an engineer. I'm not one of those guys. People used to think that just because I could say that satellite's 22,300 miles above the Earth, just south of Hawaii, over the equator, in geosynchronous orbit. That sounds good, doesn't it? That's the end of my technical knowledge right there. It's all over. It's done. Anyway, technology, RCA, had launched a satellite in December 1975, and it was flying around half empty. When we were meeting with the cable operators in Connecticut, they said, there's a new thing coming. It's going to be called satellite communications, and we think we know how it's going to work, and it's going to be a lot less expensive than normal traditional distribution. You ought to find out about it. Well, how are we going to do that? He said, well, let me call the guys together, the 5 guys who had active franchises and the 5 guys who didn't have any active franchise, and they all came together. One of the funniest meetings I've ever sat in with 15 people or 12 people, whatever it was. And our host said, Bill, has got this idea about sports, and it sounds pretty good. But we want to talk about satellite. What do we know about satellite? One guy said, I know. You can buy everything east of the Mississippi for a number. Another guy said, you don't know what you're talking about. You have to buy everything at night for 5 hours. And another one said, no, you can buy 2 hours. And so our host said, wait. We don't know any more about this than he does. Does anybody have a number? Do we know where we can find out what's going on? Yep. So I called RCA. They said, here's a number called RCA. Now picture this. This is happening in late July. I mean, within, 45 days of being fired by the Whalers. I'm a little guy. I'm out of a job. South side of Chicago, just an old retired, forcibly retired sportscaster. I'm calling RCA, and I'm going to get them to listen to me, right? But if you think about it, when you make the phone call, who answers? The switchboard or a switchboard operator. She doesn't know I'm this little guy from the south side of Chicago and all that sort of stuff. So I said something to her, told her who I was, I'm calling so-and-so about this. Yes, sir, one moment. Pretty soon the guy picks up the phone. He said, satellite sales, my name's Al Parinello. How can I help you? I said, we have this idea, and we'd like to find out a little bit more. And said, where are you located? He said, wow, that's pretty good. All because I asked the question. I told him where we were. He said, can I get up there? I can be up there tomorrow morning. Come on up. And I'm thinking, panic-stricken, where are we going to meet? We don't have an office. We're just making phone calls. So we went to the same cable operator who told us to make the call and said, this is what's going on. He said, well, you can use my conference room. He said, well, we have a company policy, you have to pay for it. He said, give me a $20 bill and you can have the conference room all day. So for $20, we had a really nice place to meet. And I don't know whether Al Parinello ever knew whether that was our office or not, but he came up, explained all the different rules. You can buy 5 hours a night for $1,250, the essence of it, 5 hours a night for $1,250. You can buy 1 month for $34,167, 24 hours a day. You figure that out, that's $1,143 a day versus for all 24 hours versus $1,250 a night. Well, that's a bargain. How can you pass up a bargain like that? We didn't know exactly what we were going to do, but we said, we'll get back to you, and we started talking about it afterwards. I said, that's a pretty good thing. So we said, we'll call him tomorrow. So I called him the next morning, still wasn't sure on this transponder satellite stuff, you know. And I said, hey, Al. Yep. Bill calling, we'll take one of those things. He says, take one of what things? Those 24-hour things that you were telling us about. You mean a transponder? Yeah. You will? He was more startled than we were. They had never sold one. We were the first 24-hour transponder sale they had. Now, what he didn't know is he had not done any financial evaluation of his new client. But they were so happy to have it, they actually sent us a confirmation and said, we're not going to be announcing anything until the end of September, and we'll have to get a formal agreement by that time. The formal agreement by the end of September was, and it was announced, I think it was September 28th, we had from that day, the day we signed it, until we used it the first time, we didn't pay anything. And once we used it the first time, we had 90 days before they would send us an invoice. They really wanted this sale to go through. And after they sent us the invoice, we had 30 days to pay. So we made the agreement in August. We used it the first time in January. We had 90 days, which took us to April, and the bill came due in May, long after Getty had agreed to give us the money to take care of it. Was it a dice roll? Yeah, was it a dice roll? But those are the kinds of things small business people have to do, and those are the kinds of things when you're talking about all of the great things that can happen if you just go to work. And so we ended up with all of the technology that we needed. And then subscribers, those customers were tough. Cable industry, I usually have a penny in my pocket, and I forgot it today. I usually forget it, too. We offered them a penny a day, 1 penny a day, and we'll give you 24-hour sports. They ran me out of town. Nope. Who wants to pay you 30 cents a month? Well, you'll see in just a minute how that works. We kept asking questions. I've talked about this before, but I worked at 2 of those networks, local affiliates, and I've always used their letters to ask questions. Always be curious. It's ABC because curiosity certainly leads to innovation. CBS, some creativity can build success. You have to be creative or you're not going to get done what you want to get done. And then one of the most important, I think, is the station that I worked for the longest, an NBC station in Massachusetts, never be complacent. If you're complacent, your competition is running right past you as you're sitting there. As soon as you get comfortable, as soon as you don't wake up every day saying, what can I do today to be better than I was yesterday, complacency sets in and you're heading in the wrong direction. Always be curious, creativity builds success, and never be complacent. Now we're going to do we'll have a couple of minutes here shortly for some Q&A, but I wanted to give you some numbers. These are really intriguing to me. Some of you have television, cable television bills. Does anybody in here pay a bill monthly to cable TV? Just a few of you, maybe 90% or so. Let me guess. Most of them are over $100 or around $100 plus or minus? $6.04 out of every one of your monthly bills goes to ESPN. That's not a bad number. When it was 100 million households, 101 something at one point, but just use 100 million for a round number, that produces some significant cash. As a matter of fact, the estimated annual revenue from just subscriber fees, is $6.5 billion. $500 million a month over the transom. Can you imagine being the chief financial officer at ESPN, or well, I guess at Disney at this point, sitting there? Oh boy, first of the month coming up, let's figure out what we're going to do with the next $500 million that's coming in from all our good friends. Because they take care of the fans keep paying. The value of Disney, I mentioned earlier, we get back to Disney, they bought ESPN about 20 years ago. Disney financials say that ESPN provides about 45% of their gross revenue. 45% of the gross revenue from a guy that they said had no ideas and all that sort of stuff, and he went ahead and built a little company called Disney that is just huge to this day. 45%. And when you come to the actual profit, it's a little over 50% of their actual profit comes from ESPN. And for those of you who like a really big number, how about that one? Their projected EBITDA is $66 billion. Started it from a $9,000 credit card cash advance, and isn't progress wonderful? There are many things that you know about ESPN, but how many of you have ever seen that logo? Well, that's great, thank you. You know how we came upon that? Our printer, we had that ESPN part. Back in that day, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have all these things that we have today. So what we had to do was it was a big publication called the SRDS, the Standard Rate and Data Service, and it had a listing of every radio, TV, and newspaper in it, and you could look up some station in Poughkeepsie or wherever, type an envelope, send them a letter, and so on, and that's how we communicated. Unlike today, one email, constant contact, whatever your program is, off it goes. So we printed those big 4 letters about this big on a number 10 envelope, hoping we sent them to people around the country that they'd start to learn about us. Then our printer, who was looking at it one day after we went through a gazillion of the envelopes, he said, "That's the dumbest looking logo I've ever seen. That really is, I'm going to take care of it for you." We said, but. He said, "Never mind, So he delivered us something that looked like this. Today that's on that big sign that I showed you at first. This is on the other side of the building, and it's become such an iconic thing. They now sell this online. It's crazy. And its origins are more than suspect. But before that, we had an even better logo. How about that one? E.S.P. Network, Inc. Whew. That's a mouthful. Not very attractive either. But that's what the site looked like when we started. You know why we ended up at that site? We started in Plainville, Connecticut. City fathers said, "We're not putting those big old dishes here," and they passed an ordinance, would not let us stay in Plainville, and Bristol's right next door. And this was a redevelopment area, and they asked us, we went over there and we were able to buy some of that land. You know what a redevelopment area is, don't you? That's when the garbage dump is filled, they plant grass and sell a chunk of it to a guy like me. And that's where it was. And ESPN is there to this day. I want to quickly show you what it looked like when we started on that first acre that we bought. That's all that was there when we started. It's a little different today. Right in the center, if you can see, there's a football field. That is a legitimate half of a football field. And they do a lot of their programming, and they do some things out there. It's just an amazing campus, 123 acres, something like 1,380,000 square feet. We started with 5,000 square feet. This was 27 days before we went on the air. If you notice the wall behind it, those 2 dishes, is only half built, and the dish to the right looks sad. This is the satellite farm today. Because of the capability of distribution worldwide, this is one of the most secure sites in the United States. You cannot get on there. As a matter of fact, ESPN and Disney hired the number 2 guy from the Terrorist Protection Division of the FBI to head up their security. And they have regular drills with Homeland Security, local police, fire, and state, and so on. Because anybody gets a hold of that, they can be everywhere. Now, this was our ace, top-of-the-line start. You see each of those canisters on the floor? They would hold 1/4 of one football game. We couldn't do the games live because of some rules and antitrust rules back in the day, but we could tape the games. So we would tape the game, we'd go to South Carolina or Florida, wherever, tape the game, and then at 10:30 at night, play it back. One night, the operator put up the fourth quarter right after the half. Not good. Not good. Now he's got a problem. Usually the game ends after the fourth quarter, but he's got all the rest of the time to fill. So he figured, well, let's just put the third quarter up. That's what he did. Sad thing, not a single phone call. Guess we weren't as far along as we thought. Today it's a little bit different than that, and of course it's all digital and so on. Our original Sports Center set, how about that one? And the man to the right in the longer, well, they both have long hair. Anyway, the one with the glasses is the one who finally, he was the first voice on the air. His name is Lee Leonard. And he launched our network with the, and you can find it online, when he said, if you're a fan, what you'll see in the next minutes, hours, and days to follow may convince you you've gone to Sports Heaven. Beyond that blue horizon is a limitless world of sport. And right now, you're standing on the edge of tomorrow. Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from ESPN, the Total Sports Cable Network. Wow. Bristol, Connecticut is on the map. This is the headquarters for sports. Well, I saw earlier, not many of you saw that, and I suspect that my relatives in Peoria are probably the only ones who really did, but it's grown a little bit since then. There's the Sports Center set that you were just looking at, and a new one, and they just introduced the third one. And, oh, this is all stuff about, you can look all that up online, and we can chat on Twitter or what all those things might be. We're going to do, whatever. Just so you know, I can spell Twitter, and I can put a couple things up. Instagram, I have no idea what that means, whether I'm going to get a box of candy or what, And Facebook, everybody says, oh, I'm following you on Facebook. I said, that's nice. I don't even know my login on Facebook. Somebody else does it for me. So I will get it eventually if you do that, but it's the way it is. We want to take a couple of minutes for some questions, if you have some, and we want to introduce that with a recently made tape that kind of encapsulates the first 35 years of ESPN.
Since the dawn of time, the great sages of the world have pondered the mysteries of life. Why are we here? How did the universe start? How many licks does it take? But nothing has confounded the great thinkers of the day more than one seemingly unanswerable question. Why Bristol? A dubious question indeed. However, for this elusive quandary, there is an answer. As with most stories of fate, this one started in a village with relaxed zoning laws. While home to the American Clock and Watch Museum, Bristol, Connecticut also welcomed satellite dishes. Lots of them. Local sportscaster and amateur satellite programming junkie Bill Rasmussen saw gold in those dishes and decided to purchase one to transmit local sports to Connecticut, the nation's epicenter of sports mania and fanaticism. That's when RCA offered him an opportunity he couldn't refuse. 24 hours of satellite time transmitted nationally for the same price. He accepted, of course, but it wasn't until an agonizing drive to Jersey that the gravity of that opportunity hit him. What in the world am I going to broadcast for 24 hours? Bill's son, startled from his nap, blurted, "Show football all day for all I care." Bill thought to himself, more sports? Sports all day, every day? Who would want to watch that? Well, wouldn't you know it? Somebody did. Tonight we celebrate the founders, the risks they took, and the many milestones that have followed that infamous drive to Jersey over 35 years ago.